What's up, everybody? Gentleman94 here. Welcome back to Flashback Fridays here on the 3GB. Today we're going to take a look at another classic game from those awesome early years of gaming for me. We're jump back to 2002 with the PlayStation 2. This is a game created by From Software called Kingsfield: The Ancient City. Now, those of you who've played the Souls series, like Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2, you'll notice that there's a lot of similarity between Kingsfield and the Soul series. And there's good reason for that. The same guy who worked on Demon Souls and Dark Souls also worked on Kingsfield. In fact, Demon Souls was originally referred to as the spiritual successor to Kingsfield. Kingsfield is a first-person action RPG. It takes place in a very medieval, very gothic-feeling world. Kingsfield 1, 2, and 3, the predecessors to Kingsfield: The Ancient City, all had the same characters and a continuation of a storyline. Kingsfield 4 picks up in a totally different world, totally different protagonist, totally different idea. Though you still use a lot of the same movement, the same spells, the same weapons, you actually have a whole bunch more locations. The graphics, of course, are way better. The early Kingsfield games have a bit of issues with tearing, graphical glitches, and frame rate issues. But I mean, what can you expect from one of the very first fully 3D RPGs to be released, on the PlayStation? In Japan, Kingsfield 1, the very, very first Kingsfield, actually helped to launch the PlayStation console. Here in the US, we didn't actually get the first Kingsfield. We actually started off with Kingsfield 2, which we, of course, being Americans, renamed Kingsfield. And then Kingsfield 3, we renamed Kingsfield 2. If you're familiar with the Final Fantasy series, it's the same idea. Final Fantasy 3 here in the US, Final Fantasy 6 in Japan. So it's a very similar idea to that. Now, talking a little bit about the early Kingsfield games, I came across the series actually in, I want to say, 96. Kingsfield 2 was out in 1996, and my buddy had actually picked it up from the video store and brought it to his house and said, "You might want to take a look at this game. We think you might like it." So I came over, I played it, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I loved it so much, in fact, that within a few weeks I went out, I found Kingsfield 1 at some mom and pop video game store somewhere, and I bought it, took it home, played the crap out of it, played it a ton. That game was one of the only reasons why I really, really, really wanted to buy a PlayStation 1. That and Command & Conquer. Those were the two games that pushed me to buy a PlayStation 1. So let's talk a little bit about the Ancient City. Kingsfield: The Ancient City is, as you can see, much better graphics. It's on PS2. It's a very slow-moving game. It's not incredibly fast. There's no action rolls. There's no dodging. There's no scaling walls. There's just you in a 3D world that's most of the time fully explorable. You have NPCs who you don't always trust, mind you. If you guys are fans of the Soul series, don't trust a lot of the NPCs, because you never know if they're actually out to hinder you or help you in your journey. A lot of things that you might like or enjoy from Demon Souls and Dark Souls came originally from Kingsfield. So some of you new gamers actually may not know that. A lot of what you play and you see in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2 got its start here in Kingsfield. I'm sure they got their start somewhere else as well. You never know. But the main thing is that the games that I played, the Kingsfield games that I played back in the mid-90s, kind of resurfaced in Demon Souls, which is probably why I love Demon Souls and Dark Souls so much, is because there's a lot in those games that remind me of Kingsfield. It takes me back to the late 90s when I was first playing these games and they were brand new. And these games were not easy. Much like Demon Souls and Dark Souls are nowadays, you died so many times in these Kingsfield games. And it wasn't really like you just respawn and you can go pick up your bloodstain like you can in the Soul series. No, if you died, your mission, your quest was over. You started back at the very beginning. So you better hoped you had saved, because otherwise the whole game was over. So it was brutal. It was brutally tough. Now, Kingsfield 4 was very confusing for me when I first started playing it, because Kingsfield 1 and 2, they were a little easier to understand for me. Kingsfield 4: The Ancient City, there was a certain section in the game where I was literally lost. I was stuck for a good 3 hours. I spent 3 hours wandering the map, trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go. And then, of course, it was all right in front of me. I should have just used one of the magic stones so I could transport to a new area. I didn't even think to do that. So there's certain things, of course, in Kingsfield, like in Souls, that unless you kind of have an inside look into the game, it may take you a while to figure out, you know. But Kingsfield was an awesome series back in those days. It was really one of the very first RPGs that I ever played that was first person. And there was something new, something novel about that. Because I had played first-person games like Doom or, Wolfenstein, Heretic, Hexen. Most of the first-person experiences, though, were all shooters. This wasn't a shooter. This was an RPG. You carried sword and spell. You used bows and arrows, crossbows, longbows. You didn't have a gun. You didn't have a shotgun or an Uzi or a Gatling gun. You had sword, spear, magic. That's all you had. And a lot of the weapons that you see in Kingsfield, you also find in Demon Souls. The famed Moonlight Sword. Moonlight Sword you can find in Demon Souls, find in Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 2. It started here in Kingsfield, guys. The very first Moonlight Sword, as far as I know, was in the very first Kingsfield game. And you actually created the Moonlight Sword from, I think, a stone sword that you found in some underground dungeon. And in Kingsfield 2, which of course we had as Kingsfield 1, you actually went to the island to steal the sword back from an evil dragon known as Gyra. And then of course in Kingsfield 2, which of course was actually Kingsfield 3, go to Kingsfield 2, you had to reforge the Moonlight Sword. This sword has shown up so many times in From Software titles. It's kind of their trademark. It's kind of their thing. I'm interested in seeing how they actually put the Moonlight Sword in to the new Bloodborne game coming out. I'm not sure if they would do it necessarily, but I'm hoping they do, and I'm curious to see how they would do it. So you can see I'm just kind of going through some of my weapons, and in Kingsfield, like in Dark Souls and Demon Souls, you have a huge chunk of weapons. Swords, pickaxes, spears, clubbing tools like a warhammer or a mace or a morning star. You have different types of bows like a longbow or crossbow, things like that. You have a lot of different types of magic too. You have your elements, of course, so you have earth, fire, water, and wind. In this one here, Kingsfield 4, they added dark. And in the ancient city, you are pretty much lost. You have to find your way and navigate through just unmarked tunnels and ruined cities. You have to talk to different NPCs and fight a host of monsters. Now, one interesting thing I do want to bring up before we kind of wrap up here is that if you guys are familiar with Dark Souls, the very first Dark Souls, and you guys look back at the area called Sen's Fortress, there were these weird snake-headed enemies. And the snake-headed enemies were kind of tough. They wielded swords, bows and arrows. They were very tough. They were, snake men, basically. Well, for anyone who's played Kingsfield the Ancient City, you'll notice that those snake-like creatures are very, very similar to the creatures that are found in the Weta Temple. So a lot of elements from Kingsfield made their way into Dark Souls and to Demon Souls. And the Weta Fortress is an excellent example of that. But anyway, guys, I want to give you a little brief look at Kingsfield the Ancient City, show you some of the elements of gameplay, talk a little bit about it. I know I'm all over the place with this one, but Kingsfield is such a cool series for me. I mean, it's what got me into gaming on the PlayStation 1. It's one of the reasons why I bought a PlayStation 1. That and Command & Conquer. Those two games opened up the floodgates in terms of console gaming for me. And in fact, this game here, Kingsfield the Ancient City, was the only reason I bought a PlayStation 2. Now, I might have eventually picked it up anyway, but when I heard that there was another Kingsfield game and it was out on PlayStation 2, I went down the next day and I bought a PS2 with this game. Anyway, so thank you guys so much for watching. Tune in next Friday for another episode of Flashback Fridays. Until then, take it easy, keep gaming. Be back here next time on Flashback Friday.